Morning, everyone. I apologize for being late, but I'd like to call everybody to the special call meeting. Today is Thursday, May the 6th, if you can believe it, 2021. The hour is 10:04. And we will begin with our single item today, and that is the budget discussion. And I will let our city manager, Mr. Earl Coffey, take it from here.
Thank you, Mayor Commissioners. Trying to get organized on how to present it in my head, and so.
A little late for that, Earl.
Well, yeah, yeah, we're here, right?
Yeah.
The big emphasis on what we've talked about so far is staffing and payroll, and that's the thing everyone's most interested in. So what we were going to do first is draw your attention to the total authorized positions by fund, which is this handout that's in your packet, and we'd like to look at that for a second together. We had Randy assemble it. We really want to there's a difference between what you budget and authorized positions. And so what we'd like to do is, on an annual basis, as we adopt the budget, officially adopt with the budget the table of authorized positions, so that everyone, it is abundantly clear what's happening, right? And so these positions that are in this handout are the positions that are sculpted in the budget that are attached, that is attached, I guess. And so we'll start with, it's broken out, and we can go as deep into that as you want, and we'll just drift through the top level first, and if y'all want to keep going, we can, because we have it broken out by the department. But what we'll do is start with just this broad table, which is the general fund, legislative, executive. The year we are in, we have 7 full-time positions that were supposed to be authorized. What we're asking you to authorize moving forward and fund is 5. Finance department had 10 positions originally. What we are asking you to authorize in that department will be 6, and we're going to move 3 of those employees over to, or 3 of those positions over to the utility admin department, which you'll see down later on. So that's the theme as we go down through the list. IT 4 and 4. One of those positions that it would be considered vacant in this budget upcoming. We are moving James McClure to the utility admin to be really your SCADA IT person for that fund.
What's SCADA mean?
Sensory computer access control, something I can't think of it all. It's a long acronym, but it's SCADA. It's your computer control system for your utility equipment. So you'll have a remote pump station that's controlled by the water plant. That digital display at the water plant, where the raw water pump station, for example, is managed at the water plant, that system that is called our SCADA system. It's become more and more technical, and in talking with IT at this point, it makes sense to have, so you really have 2 different types of IT. You have a network person that is doing computer programming, then you have someone dealing with physical equipment. On the utility now, you have, it is very radio intensive. It is it's control panel. It's a little different.
I got it.
Yeah, okay. Moving along, police, we are asking that you fund 39 positions. Currently, you have 37 positions funded in that department. Fire, we're asking that you're converting some of your part-time labor into full-time staff. We have sought a grant to help offset some of that cost. I don't know what the deadline is when we'll hear about that grant. Then communications, we're asking to add a dispatcher to 14. Code enforcement staying level. Public Works, we have moved 1 person from legislative executive into Public Works. That's your executive assistant by salary. Stormwater, you have 4. Cemetery, you have 2. Those are the same.
Let me back up just a minute. Who's now the executive assistant in Public Works?
Ms. Collins.
Okay. Okay, so you're going to add one.
No, we're not adding anyone. We're moving, so that position was funded in the legislative executive
Gotcha.
department. We are moving that to the public works department by expense,
Gotcha.
right? So between legislative and public works, you had 14 positions. Moving forward, you will have 13,
Yep.
right?
Good.
Okay. Stormwater, you have 4 proposed. Cemetery, you have 2. Next page is the utility fund. There's where you see a lot of shifting to account for the utility admin. And we'll walk through that. You have the utility director, the executive assistant. You have the utility inspector will be moved from water distribution into that department. You have the special projects coordinator will be moved from water distribution into that department. You have the utility clerks that are here in City Hall. There's 3 of those positions. One is billing, 2 are collections. Those 3 positions will move from the finance department into the utility admin department. And then we are asking that, and the other IT staff is moving from the city IT over to the utility fund IT. Then you end up with, we are requesting that we add an electrician to the staff, full-time electrician.
How many do you have now?
None. So we invest quite a bit, obviously, in electrical on-site. We also feel like that this position could help the general fund in ways as well. So we would fund that through the utility. They would spend 99% of their time with the utility, though. Water treatment plant is 9 and 9. Water distribution, you see that reduction, but a lot of that is already is not going away. It's moving into the utility admin. Sewer plant is funding it at the level that of existing staff positions. So we had an extra position in there that we do need, but we are trying to address compensation now. So for us, let's get the compensation squared away, and then when we add staff in the future, we'll get back to where they need to be. Same thing with wastewater rehab. Perryville has 1. Parking fund has 1 employee. Parks and Rec is a little bit more complicated because that's when you really get into the part-time and temporary seasonal. Those are some big numbers on the right side. Full-time Parks and Rec staff, we have 6 in the budget, 6 proposed in the proposed budget. Part-time employees, which is staffing the fitness center, for example, you have 12 proposed. And then temporary seasonal, which is your concessions, your pool, those staff is 90. And we're trying to fund that level again at 90. Now, once we get past that, we have it broken out by title on the next sheet on page 3 through each department. And we won't necessarily read that individually, but we would ask that you take your time to go through that. So today, we can steer this in 2 different directions. We can talk about every detail, or we can present the information and then come back Monday if you all have questions and want to really get into it. I would suggest meeting Monday at 3, and so that we can present additional tables or some questions I want to clean up between now and then on debt service, for example, and we'll show you that here in a second. For the utility side, I know what the total is, but I want to make sure that we allocate those to the line items correctly. As an example, so I'm not going to read through these. You're welcome to have that. These numbers on these sheets should reflect the bigger number that we just showed you. So, for example, the legislative executive has 5. Currently, it has 7, and you can see on the right side, fiscal year 2022, the positions that are funded are the city manager, city engineer position, HR director, city clerk, and administrative assistant in that office. The executive assistant moves to public works, secretary goes away. And so you'll see that translated as you go through the file. Hopefully that helps a little bit of create an understanding of how many employees we have and where they're located, right? And so then moving forward, we would like for you to authorize those positions every year as we adopt the budget and include that in your ultimate budget book. So the next thing we'll look at is the general fund summary. before we get too far in that, let's turn over to the next page. And we will talk about the impact. So the main goal, if you'll remember, we'll go up here to the screen real quick and show you if it will work. Randy had a presentation some time back, and I didn't copy it over there. I thought it did. Remember, we talked about the impact of the Hannah study on pay. And then we had two different scenarios. We had it all in 1 year, and then we had it broken out over 3 years, right? So as we talked about then, we've incorporated into the budget the 3-year approach to the compensation study. So the numbers that are in here has that study fully funded for year one, for both the general fund and the utility fund, right? And the numbers do seem to work for the year we're in. Moving forward, we'll see how that goes. We'll have to cross that bridge. But this is a start, and we do think we can absorb this start. There's some things we'll get in on the revenue as we talk about projections of the revenue, how you'll understand why we're doing year one, and then we know we'll do year two and take that up later. Notwithstanding, though, this page 2 is the net impact by cost category for the general fund after you do this round of budgeting, including the Hannah study, right? And so you have on that sheet the proposed expenses or appropriations for each department that's in the general fund.
Time out, Earl.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if
It's
I'm
the
lost or
second,
if we're
should be
all
the
lost.
second page.
Okay, and it's not up on the screen either.
No, I'll put it up there for you.
Okay.
Yeah. The second 11 by 17 page.
Which is still listed as number 1.
Probably so,
Okay.
yeah. I'll get this to open. Matt, can you hit enter to see if that will open it on the keyboard?
I had a couple questions on this section.
Go
Should I
ahead.
ask now or at the end?
You're welcome to, yeah, well,
Right now? Okay.
yeah.
So you're going to budget the authorized positions?
That is what it,
Correct.
so the authorized positions that you have in that table in FY '22, those are what is included in the budget.
Okay. The total for original and a total for authorized, were they the same number of employees? Or did we have, like, what was the bottom line? Like, were all employees kind of shifted to different places with the
No.
same number? Or?
No, and we, citywide, I should have a total, and I don't, so we'll make sure we do that by Monday.
Okay, I was just curious
Yeah,
what the
this-
bottom, because I know you added one to police and, transferred a couple to
Right.
fire, but then other ones got moved.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was, okay.
Yeah, and we'll totalize it. And that 2 is, it looks like this. That is your appropriations. So the top line where we have additional numbers to the right of it, that is your expenses by department that's included in the spreadsheets behind you, right? And what we've done is, for example, Finance Administration has a total appropriations proposed of $942,861, right? And so then we've broken that up into personnel cost, contract services such as audit, for example, and then material and supplies, which is office supplies, basically. And so we've done that for every department and then citywide as well by totalizing it with the bold line.
Okay, so theoretically, this should match
They do match, yeah.
this, okay,
Right, they do match by department.
okay.
But it just looks at it a little bit differently, right? And so The,
Earl, would you mind, at some point, just adding in those categories that you just mentioned, like under finance, the 427, 250 is audit?
well, that is in your budget detail behind you.
Okay.
I'm just talking about, what I'm trying to focus on in the next 5 minutes is just the net impact, or where are we sitting now with the, where's your money going in bulk, right? So Matt, if you'll go to the file behind you, okay, you can bring that here. Yeah, yeah. So after you do this, I've got two pie charts. The first pie chart is the very next page. And this is your cost distribution expenses by category for the general fund. And you can see what the percentage of 78% looks like as far as total city investment, right? So 78% of the general fund money is going towards salary and staff and those types of
And
expenses.
of that 78, I'm gonna guess it, close to 85% or better is going to police and fire and 911.
It is, yeah, that is, so the sheet before, sheet one, I'm trying not to jump around too much on the screen since this really doesn't react real well.
So of 11.6,
So if you go to the first page, the very first 11 by 17 sheet. Well, it's not reacting to that. It's not liking that, I should say. Okay, so your very first big sheet is your total city budget. If you look on the right side, it's not a graphic representation, so you have to interpret what your data is. But in the budget year that we're finishing, FY '21, so that column where it says percent of budget, Mayor, to answer your question. So today, your percent of budget by expense, the police is 16%. The fire is 11%, almost 12, for example. And then communications is 4%. So the next column in FY '22 is what is proposed in the budget.
Right.
And that's the impact of your investment in your employees, right? So now the police is moving to roughly 25.5% of the budget. Fire is 21%, and dispatch is 6.5% of the budget.
right, I see that. I'm making the point that of the total, in terms of personnel cost, the biggest percentage by a large margin is police, fire, and 911,
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah.
which is where we should be putting most of our money.
So then,
But Earl, before you move on though.
yeah, and a lot of that's, for example, streetlights.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that a little bit.
But it also shows major increases in all departments across the board, so that's a good thing.
Yeah. And it is in payroll, and we'll see that when we get into the individual budgets coming. So I'm giving you a table to look at. I'm giving you a lot of information in the first two pages. There's a significant amount of information, and we have a couple of different analyses on them, right? For example, on the very first sheet, this right column that's over here is two different comparisons. One is the year we are proposing versus that budget that we are actually in. The other one is the budget we are proposing versus the year that where we expect to finish based on our year-end actual. So The first column is the budget, the second column is actual. So in revenue, when we get it up to this top row, if you glance at the screen, you can see where I'm pointing on the mouse, this area here. If you look at that, that's your revenue. So we're proposing significantly more revenue than we budgeted in the year we're in.
You mean you're anticipating significantly more revenue?
Correct, yeah. And the reason we are anticipating significantly more revenue is because of the next column. Our actual estimated budget, where we expect to end the year, is significantly higher than what we budgeted. So in other words, I was wanting to talk about, when we get into revenue, we'll talk about the impact of COVID. And it looks like that we're recovering from that. And so then I'll explain the basis for our revenue projection on that sheet here in a second.
So you already see a trend of license and fees increasing per
Yeah.
month?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'd
so,
like to hear
so
about that, yeah.
keep in mind, I'm saying that this is a lot of information. So I'm not expecting you all to like look at it, digest it. This is me printing the PDFs and handing them to you and trying to describe for a minute what you're being handed. You can take it and digest it. If you want to discuss it with me, you're welcome to. But then we'll come back Monday, is what my suggestion is, and really revisit it and say, okay, do we understand what we're doing? Do you all understand what we're proposing? Say it like that, right? Okay, so you got the summary, then you have the next sheet is just how it's broken up by cost category to show you the impact of the HANA study on it, right? And then you have your pie chart that demonstrates for you really how much of your expenses are represented by the cost categories, right? And you can see you're investing in an employee by a wide margin.
The first pie chart.
The first pie chart,
Okay.
yeah. So the next sheet that you get is the revenue for the general fund. And you have one label, unfortunately, because I should have numbered it in the PDF. I'll do that before we email it out. But on this part of the sheet, up in this upper left-hand corner, it's titled. This is where the title is for the sheet you're looking at, right in this area. And that sheet is the general fund revenue. So you should see that on that sheet. In this, you have taxes, license and fees, penalties, service revenue, other reoccurring revenues such as operating transfers from the utility fund, intergovernmental revenue, and then special purpose revenue. And that's where you'll see the revenue land for the CARES Act money that we're anticipating, or the ARP money that we're anticipating. Okay, so starting at the top, taxes, the property taxes are pretty stable. They really didn't decline during COVID. And so if you go back to the subtotal for that category in FY18, which is your first column, and then as you move to the right, you get into estimated 2021, and you'll see those numbers are generally flat across through there, right? And so then we feel good about that being reliable moving into the next year. Then license and fees, which is a significant portion of your revenue now. And in fact, if you go to the very first summary sheet, what you find is that category represents 70% of the city's revenue now, which is, be nice to have that a little bit more diversified. And so that's going to be something that we'll have to continue to look at as we go forward over time.
But that's been the case for a long time.
Long time,
Yeah.
yeah. Very hard to do, until the state does something with,
Right.
to give you more options.
Right.
You're really, really, really impacted by downturns in employment, right? Which is what you see here. So if we go to the very first line in that section, 4220, in FY18, you see 8.5. Then in 19, you see 8.6. Then you started to see the first impact of COVID in the last half of 20. So you see the decline.
Yeah.
And then it bottoms out in the fiscal year you're in, but it's higher than we anticipated. So an estimated 21 is based on our actual numbers for revenue as of April 30th, right? So based on those numbers, we should anticipate ending at about 7.2. If you look to the far right column where it says budgeted FY '21, we projected conservatively that we would end up at about $6 million, right? So we are beginning at a much stronger position than we anticipated with that line item. Now, when we look at the total of that license and fees category, we've reached out and talked to a few different people. You remember at the one budget meeting, I talked about the presentation we got from the fellow with Huntington Bank that the projection is from economists that we'll end up at 90% of our revenue in the year we're going into. For the projection purposes, we were conservative, both in net profits and also occupational license. Since occupational license is such a big percentage, we stopped at 87.5% there. We are projecting, based on the April numbers, that 7.2 is about 84% of revenue, right? 84% of pre-COVID revenue. And so rather than going to, in our new budget, going to 90% of pre-COVID revenue, we are projecting that we'll end up at 87.5% of pre-COVID revenue. And that interpretation is really the foundation for the general fund revenue and resources. Your property taxes are flat, generally stable. We would suggest only taking the compensating rate. Then your license and fees, we do expect a recovery. We're at 84% now, 84% of your original pre-COVID revenue. We are only projecting that we'll get to 87.5%, and hopefully that is clear and makes sense. So from that, those are the control mechanisms that are manipulating the resources you have available to fund operations of the city going forward. Does that make sense? Okay. So now, before we get into each individual budget, again, if you go back to the summary page, and then we'll top line it, which is your very, very first page for the general fund. And you are welcome to, we'll look at every budget individually, but I don't want to just inundate you by talking about every individual line item today, right? We'll come back with questions if that's what y'all want. But on this sheet, what you'll see is so this is a draft budget, and as a draft, we've not tried to fund capital yet. The big capital that we have ongoing is the fire station. That's funded with a bond issue, so that doesn't affect your operating revenue. As you go forward, projects that we will ask you to consider, and we'll try to have the capital summarized by Monday's meeting. But what the big question is, do you fund streetscape? Right now, it looks like it's got like a $4.1 million price tag. And I think Josh is predicting a presentation on that Monday. And so let's hold that in reserve and talk about that in depth Monday. But that's the big upcoming in the fiscal year capital project that would ask for funds. Go ahead, Mayor.
I was just trying to reference the page.
This is the very first page.
Okay.
And I'm sorry for not having page numbers. I thought the PDF did that when I created them.
And you can explain it to me later, because I don't understand the whole funding of the fire station, and I want to understand that.
Yeah, I can walk you through that, but the city
walk
issued a
through that.
bond, and so we're paying those out of bonds.
Over,
I don't know the exact term of that bond issuance. I don't have that file in front of me.
I think it was 30 years.
I want to say it was a 30-year. It wouldn't have been on a fire station like that. You probably wouldn't have done a 40, but I do think it's 30.
But I think
So-
the average cost was sub 2.5.
So one of the things that we will do is Compass Financial they have a budget, a debt report for us.
Right.
We're going to ask them to present that to you. I don't know if it'll be Monday or not. I'd like for it to be Monday. And if we don't put it on the 3 o'clock agenda, we may put it on the afternoon agenda
Okay.
or the
That-
evening agenda.
That was kind of
Right.
what I was waiting for.
That's the next, yeah,
Okay.
right. That's a,
Thank you.
so we are piecemealing the budget a little bit for you, right?
Sure.
Like we're giving you pieces at a time. Okay? So the highlighted column in blue is the year we're proposing. And when we go through that, the total resources, which is near the top, is 19.2. And our total expenditures will be, not including capital, will be about 18.7, right? So we anticipate adding to the reserve right now. And as a placeholder, for example, the community agencies, when you ask how much money do you have for community agencies, we've allocated roughly 110,000 for that fee. That tends to fit the budget. And then I've highlighted the row of capital. It's empty, and so we'll account for that with a fund balance. So a lot of your capital. So Jenny, to answer your question, you have fund balance carry forward at the bottom. So the city in year FY19, if you'll look at that top column. Yeah, I'm still on that summary page. I'm going to work from the summary page for a bit. Right. So when you look at FY19 at the top, under resources, you'll see a $10 million bond issuance, which is special purpose revenue. Right? So that's when the money came into the city. And so that appears as, if you look that year, your fund balance increased, right? And so now you're funding the construction of the fire station out of that fund balance. That's where the money that you borrowed is sitting. And so you'll pull down that fund balance as you fund the parking garage or the fire station. Does that make sense? But again, I've not programmed that yet because I wanted us to have an opportunity to look at operations by themselves and look at the revenue against operations by itself for a minute, which is the purpose of this handout. So then the capital, what we'll do is we'll come back and we will show by department all the capital. We'll have the capital summarized, and then because a lot of that capital, before we just program it in, you need to tell us what to do. For example, the streetscape, do we do that or not? You know, that kind of questions. Those kinds of questions. And so once you all tell us what you want capital to be programmed in, then we'll update the spreadsheet with that information. Right.
Refresh my memory. How low did you get the price down to for the fire station?
It ended up right at 5.9, say 6 million to construct.
Okay, by doing some things in-house and,
The market
Building.
really was most impactful, but,
okay.
right.
Which is interesting, because I know we budgeted over 7, almost 8.
I thought, yeah,
We
I thought it was
budgeted,
eight.
that's correct, 7.5,
And I still don't know how, in this inflationary building cost environment, that came in counter to everything else out there.
well, there was a brief period where things were doing that, where people were trying to get their employees back to work.
Yeah.
And we got the benefit of that on the fire station. The wastewater plant didn't fare so well initially when we bid it, so it came in over. And so we're doing value engineering at the wastewater plant right now. Hopefully, we can get it to a number that's affordable. And so that's coming, but I don't know when Marshall's going to have that together.
And we're gonna have some change orders with the fire stations anyway, so we'll.
Hopefully not, but you do end up with some usually. We've already ended up with two, and one of which was, there's a difference between a change order and a betterment. And so the last one is you're trying to actually do a betterment. And we will still, the streetscape component, there's still 2 properties that the streetscape is not done because we were anticipating the construction. And so we would probably go ahead and add those details into this contract too for that vacant property. I don't know, we'll see whatever Josh wants to do there. He would make that suggestion to us, and we've not even talked about it yet. We're so far away.
Okay.
So then,
Thank you.
when you're looking at this summary sheet, hopefully this starts to provide a little bit of clarity in the blue column. By department, the expenses are the same expenses that you see on the next sheet where we broke it out by cost category. And then, of course, debt service is listed.
Go back to, on the first page, community agencies. I was thinking that our previous budget session was much more than the 119. But maybe I'm thinking of the budget session before that,
Okay, the budget session before that was the 280 number.
right?
The budget that you were in is approved at 77,000. But remember, that included a cut to the senior citizen center.
Yeah.
That was most impacted by COVID.
Yeah.
And so what we were asked for Monday, and just so we could see that for today, the 119 is a reflection of adding $40,000 back to the senior citizen center out of your CARES Act money, right? And so you all can think about that. The reason I included it there and the reason I wanted to show it, number one, it's easy to back out if you all decide not to do it Monday. But two, I want to make sure we demonstrate the impact as we're talking about such a significant increase in payroll, that we can still absorb that. And part of the reason is because it is because of the COVID revenue that you're using to offset it, which is in your fund balance.
Now,
So,
the CARES money,
mhm.
and we've talked about that, I'm trying to find that.
Shows up at the top on that same sheet you're looking at is where we're bringing it in to the city. Under special purpose revenue, you're going to get it in 2 cycles. The ARP money,
Yeah.
you're going to get 1.552 in the estimated year end, and then you're going to get 1.552 in the proposed year. It's going to occur in two cycles. In the spring of 22, you should receive another payment according to the language that they've given us.
I bring that to your attention because I don't want us to set a budget for the next 2 years.
No.
Based on that
No. So
income and
that
then
is,
have to cut back significantly.
yeah, so the initial allocation that you had, which was rough in the fiscal year you're in, was designed to be revenue replacement, right? And it was estimated to be 1.2, roughly 1.5, say. And if you go to that revenue sheet over there and you look at occupational license, they did a good job by predicting how low we would be. And so instead of 7.2, when you add back in the revenue replacement of 1.5, you're going to end up at about the number that you should have gotten pre-COVID, right? So that prediction was fairly strong, which works out good for us in the short term. Long term, though, we hope our occupational license recovers and we get stabilized again. But this new round of money has specific purpose. And so it has 3 purposes. The biggest thing is it's one of the easiest things you can use it for, water and sewer capital construction. So out of the first $1.5 million, what we would probably suggest is using that for Spears Creek and pump station, which will be needing funded, and then saving a portion of it, $1 million of it, for another utility project, and then deciding on the second 1.5 that will be received as revenue in the new budget next year, and decide what you want to do with it. You really are very limited on what you can do with that money, right? So it's not, what I'd like to do is use it to offset some expenses on maybe even the streetscape or something like that, but I don't think that's an eligible expense yet.
Probably not.
Yeah. Now, parks development could be, but it's not to be, I don't think you can do that yet either. So we'll see, and we'll get into that, but right now, we're showing it being received there. It'll end up in the fund balance until we assign a use for it.
Well, let me ask you a question, just for clarification for myself. Still on the general fund summary. The total resources that you're proposing is 19 million,
Yep.
and estimated for this current year, 18.5, and that's really during COVID time, so really you're not really anticipating a major increase, which, again, I think is safe and sound. When I go down to the total appropriations, for this year, you have 14.9, and then you're proposing for 21, 22, 18.7. Again, not a major increase. So I think you've been pretty conservative if we're getting back on track with things I want to call post-COVID, if such a term.
Yeah, and time will tell, for sure.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, if you look at that difference between your total appropriations, if you go up to the subtotal under your operating budget, you'll see almost all of that difference is absorbed in that operating area, and almost a significant portion of that's going to be in your, to implement your your compensation study
Well,
details.
Yeah, and that was my next compliment, even putting that in there, which we think is a major investment. It really doesn't change the numbers a whole lot.
Not yet, and what worries you is year two, and so what we're predicting is that you'll get to 87.5% of your pre-COVID revenue. If you get to 90%, you're in a much stronger position, but you really need to be at 100% of your pre-COVID revenue to really fully implement that HANA study in year 2 and 3, right? And so we've just got to go forward knowing that if it's the right thing to do to address your compensation, if that's what y'all want to do, which that's what you've said, then you can do that in year 1. And we know we got a hurdle in year 2, but really year 2 is going to be dependent. Everything you do differently in year 2 is going to be dependent on whether or not you get to 90, 95, 96% of your pre-COVID revenue anyway, right? So you're in a holding pattern after year 1 until you know that, and you won't know that till January, February, so.
And that's the 18.5,
Yes, sir.
2021.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So a little bit of math, of the 87% of revenue, 61% is in the license and fees, which we've always said, about 60% of our budget is there.
Yep.
In other words, if we're going to increase revenue, it's got to come from jobs.
Yes, that is correct. We have to figure out a way to continue to get people employed and generate jobs here. That's our priority.
That's the bottom line.
Correct.
And it's projected to go to 70% of our income, if I read it right.
That is
That's the-
correct.
It says license and fees, but that's the occupational tax.
That's that's your net profits and your occupational
Right.
license. Yeah.
Which can be done. You guys get out and get to work.
So now, if you want to dive into each individual department, or you want to look at that, we can. They are laid out. If you go to the very next page, the legislative executive is first. You have it broken out in detail. Personnel is the top line. The first subtotal is your total investment in personnel costs. The next one is contractual services, such as legal services. You have a total there. That's your next subtotal. And then you have your other services, which is your miscellaneous office supplies. Let me go to that sheet up here, just to make that easier on everybody. If this mouse would work more efficiently, for some reason, I struggle with it.
I tell you, the other thing that we need to do for the publics, we got to figure out some way to expand that and/or give you some kind of laser pointer.
Yeah, I'll use my computer next time. This trackpad is great for just a simple, but you really can't navigate a PDF and zoom in and zoom back out with it very well. We'll use my computer next time. That'll help a lot. So that's legislative executive. The next is finance, and then the one after that is IT, and the one after that is the police department. What I'd like to do is spend a little bit of energy on that because in the police department, that's where you really see the most impact of the Hannah study. Okay. So what we've included on this sheet, we've tried to be consistent across the board, right? And every sheet has the same organization of numbers on it. You have the actual, we've tried to demonstrate 5 years' worth of information. So it starts with the FY 18 actual, FY 19, FY 20, and then estimated year end of FY 21, and then proposed year we're going into, that being your 5th year. For reference, we included the budget that we're actually in so that you can compare that to the estimated if you want. The blue column is your proposed. And so for the police department, let's look at estimated year end for that subtotal of personnel versus the proposed. That's your last column. So we are estimating that we will end up in police labor expenses of about 2.8, and we're proposing after you increase salaries of an investment in staff, the roll-up expenses, meaning retirement, all those expenses that are rolled into that, moving from 2.8 to 4.34 or 35. That is an increase, if you look at the far right column on that subtotal, of $1.494 million, or 52% increase in total cost to the police to implement phase 1 of the market study. Now, that does include also the roll-up expenses that you incurred during the fiscal year last year, right? Where we added longevity for everybody, and then we went to the experience-based pay grade system, which, so what we will do is, as we get the budget done, Randy's already working on that new revised compensation model, rather than relying on COLA, go to an experience-based pay change annually. And we've got a couple of examples. The city of Henderson did a really good job. I'm getting gonged over here. She's like wanting to gong.
Either that or it's round one.
I know,
which
round one. Randy's putting that together. That's probably with payroll, with implementing the payroll changes with Paylocity, that's going to look like an August presentation to you, maybe even September, by the time we're able to get that fully, to convert that into text, right, to present. So the net impact then on, as you can see, the rest of it is you see a small increase on contract services for the police, 4% over the year end. And then for other miscellaneous office supplies, you'll see an increase of 13% over the year end, which is, again, that's your far right column for the police. Total, you're seeing a 47% increase to the police department budget, almost 95% of that's in payroll.
You're 4.3 million in payroll, and you're covering all the anticipated increases in the retirement benefits.
Yeah, yep. Those are rolling into those expenses.
That's at 937. Well, that should be.
There's a large jump in the medical and hospital as well.
Yeah.
What'd you say? I can hear.
That's true. And that is based on those changes that we had this year. So that includes all of the employee expenses for that department, all of them.
What makes you think that will go down?
I don't necessarily think that will go.
Okay, never mind, I'm looking at the wrong thing.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry.
there's also, I know part of that is adding positions.
Part of that's adding positions. So you got 2 new positions in the police department, and that's fully staffed
But
at
that's
39 positions.
That's a big jump,
It is a big jump.
and I thought we were saving money with our medical coverage.
Correct. And that's what Randy's job is, to try to figure that out. And we've talked a lot about that, and we're working on it.
Okay.
Going forward, we do, that's something we have to get control of. We've talked about a lot about that. The year we're in, we're trying to get the compensation adjusted, and then as we get that implemented, then we're going to come back to cost categories like that.
Want to make sure we're looking on down the road now, because that CERS is going to jump.
That's a big number already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's going to get bigger.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to need to salt away some funds for that.
I think Randy was saying 3 to 5% per year increase over 5 years for
The numbers that,
CERS.
the numbers that I saw, now this was pre-breakout of CERS from
15 to
KRS.
25% higher,
It was a big number higher.
yeah.
It was a big number.
Something,
Compounding number.
something too.
Yeah, it doesn't go away. It's not one time.
Something too that's interesting, if you go back to your cost category sheet, that page 2, that looks like this. What's interesting is when you look at your cost by department, by category, the police department, you would think that they are mostly labor. The fire department, you would think that they are mostly labor in terms of operating expenses. And it kind of trends that way, whereas Public Works, Public Services is only 31% of that department's budget. Well, they're paying for the streetlights, they're paying for all sorts of things out of that department, which is why you see contract services for the Public Works at 53% versus the police department at 5%, right? It's just what do they do every day kind of thing, right? It's
But that number, since we've hired the inspector, and we will hire an electrician, that helps that number
over time, yeah.
over time.
Yeah. So then,
You went back to that sheet, and I thought you was gonna tell us, police personnel, 91% of their budget.
yeah.
That's what I had circled back there, but that's a good thing, though.
Well, and you know, again, when you look at the cost by category, you're investing in, a big piece of what the police do is people, right? So then, once you get past the police department, you can go to the next sheet, which is your fire, and you'll see a similar impact to implement the compensation study. So we'll start with that far right column. Over the year end, you're talking about increasing their personnel investment by 1.48 million, which is a big increase. Now, keep in mind, they're converting some staff from part-time to full-time, right? So that's not necessarily as clean as the police department side. But the total impact to the fire department is 1.5 million
Need
to
to
their.
change your screen, Earl.
Yeah, I didn't go back. Total impact at the bottom for the fire department's $1.5 million increase. The next sheet is communications, which is a little different scale simply because it doesn't have as many line items. I try to fit everything on one sheet. Hopefully, that's good enough. That way, you didn't have any more sheets than necessary. But the bottom line there is also an increase of 30% to personnel of $245,000 roughly, and total budget increase for them. Then that rolls up into a $311,000 increase over where you're at today.
And that's adding 3.
That's adding one 911 operator to a fully staffed department.
What are you gonna do, this is on fire, right? What are we gonna do with all the part-timers?
We are not going to be utilizing part-time staff at all. We might end up with 2 to 3 just to infill when someone's off, but you're not, right now, we're dependent on 30. That goes away, and we're converting that to full-time staff. It's better trained, better response, the net benefit's much higher.
Why did we get to that point of 15? What was the thinking?
Time, it's just the natural progression of modernization of your fire department over time. fire department in Jackson County is totally volunteer, right? And then by the time you get to Lexington, it's totally, there's no it's all full-time, it's all trained, certified, right? And we're in the middle of that. And so we're transitioning from that part-time, highly dependent on part-time staff to a program where it's probably going to be all full-time people.
And telecommunicators, are we trying to transition that to all full-time as well?
Yes. So these are full-time positions for 911. Next sheet is Public Works. You'll see an increase to the Public Works salary of $170,000.
The next sheet was codes.
Oh, yeah, ours is covered.
I might have skipped it right over codes. Sorry, Bridget. The total impact in their department is, bottom line is $40,000 increase to that department. Salaries are generally flat because for them, there's a slight increase, particularly because that was most, one of the departments, there's just, number one, not a lot of people in there, but they were closest to the market out of all the departments. The next one is Public Works. You'll see a 43% increase in personnel expenses over the year end, $170,000 increase. The net increase in that department is just a little bit lower at $163,000. Then the next sheet, we won't necessarily spend a lot of time in other than highlighting a few things. Non-departmental. It's too easy not to flip this, the slides up here. But non-departmental, the biggest thing you have is you have your transfers for Parks and Recreation. You have your, which is down towards the bottom, the 716 number. You have your transfers to make your other funds whole, your museum fund, the garbage fund. And you'll see that we have a new contract. So the idea is that we get closer to no transfer to the garbage as time passes. Transfer to the parking garage in the blue column is down at the bottom for not parking garage, parking fund. Inside of that is your commitment to your EDP, your airport board, planning and zoning. So we're trying to maintain the funding that so in this first budget, we maintained the funding that you had last year for those categories. And then, except for planning and zoning, we didn't get all the way back to 75. We programmed up to 60. If y'all want to add all the way back up to 75, we could probably absorb that. I typed that in before I got everything done, so we'll defer to you all on that when you do your community agency allocation. The next sheet is your debt service, which is out of the, we'll let Compass demonstrate and communicate that for you in detail Monday if they can be here. The next sheet is municipal aid, which is we're not wanting to put money from the general fund into municipal aid this year. We're going to rely on the fund balance for that, which there is a little bit of carryover in that fund. We are expecting to bring in $308,000 into that fund, and we are asking that you spend $400,000. We've left the $125,000 for the road on the bypass that Josh talked about last year, and we're putting roughly $50,000 in for resurfacing and $25,000 into Public Works to do pothole repair and such. The next sheet is the streetscape. Right now, you're funding by operating transfer from the general fund, the design contract for your streetscape. We'll get an update on that Monday. And then there would be, if you desire to do the construction, this is where that money would show up eventually. So we'll talk about that when we get into the capital presentation and down the road. But right now, the streetscape is money in from the general fund to pay the design contract. Now, the next is parks, which is a smaller sheet. Looks like, not smaller, smaller by amount of text on it.
Back up the streets.
it doesn't say parks on it.
It does at the bottom, yeah.
Well, I never saw the bottom.
I didn't
That's
either.
my, I will, I'll get them numbered at some point in the future.
Back up just a minute, if you don't mind, the streetscape. You said that number is for design,
For the design contract that we're doing now, yes.
and how much is that?
The contract, I want to say is like 270 from top of my head,
To design it?
to design the elements, yeah. You got to design the traffic signals, that's fairly intensive engineering work, to be honest with you.
Are we doing any of that in-house?
No, the transportation cabinet, that, some of that, so your street lighting has to be done by a street lighting certified contractor. You can't, there's some of those things we tried to do the Third Street streetscape in-house before, and that was just totally rejected, and we were told to start over. So, yeah, it adds a lot of expenses to that, no doubt. So, for example, the 2168 trail that was funded by the transportation grant up on the bypass that's just being done, we had to, the county administered that contract. They did have to invest in an engineering firm to design that. That was probably $70,000 or $100,000. The last section of the Henson Trail that we did, we kind of designed that in-house, and we didn't have that expense, but we weren't on right-of-way. So when you're dealing with the right-of-way, the cabinet really takes a more rigid position on wanting transportation-trained consultants to do that work.
Does that
And some of
get-
your grant money requires it too.
Well, does that get reimbursed through the grant, or is that sort of like your matching funds?
Well, we've always used it as matching when
Okay.
we've had to invest in a design firm, yeah. So this next sheet is your resources for Parks and Recreation. The total budget there, we've tried to, if you look at those two columns and how the money was budgeted last year to this year, the total bottom line really isn't changing. What we're doing is trying to actually align the expenses to where they actually are better. Because we really didn't spend a lot of energy on that last year as it relates to Millennium Park Fitness Center pool. You can see a more accurate depiction of the expenses for each one when we look at that now, right, in the proposed budget. And the detail of those are on your next three sheets. Millennium Park is your first one. And these will only say it at the bottom. The second one is your fitness center. That's where your full-time staff is housed, and that's where you see the biggest impact in the personnel is because that's where they're housed. So rather than trying to distribute some of your full-time staff to the Millennium Park or this or that, we put the full-time staff in one department.
How will this be considered in terms of, or will it be considered in terms of Jenny Rogers?
We have not programmed that yet. Those full-time staff would take that and deal with that as we go forward. We'll plan that space with Evan and Josh, and we're getting into that after this meeting. We'll start talking about that and how internally after this meeting today. Wanted to get past this first. The next sheet is the pool, which a lot of that expense is chemicals and then part-time staff, lifeguards and your concessions and whatnot.
Can the pool be reopened this summer?
We are anticipating opening it in Memorial Day,
Okay, because
after Memorial Day.
you've already had the expert from Louisville come back down, take a look
Yeah,
at it?
yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
lot lower cost than I thought.
Yeah,
It's because it's only gonna be filled halfway.
the one thing that's not totalized there real well is the water consumption. And so you know, this is really the first year we've actually done a really good job with actually creating the budget for the pool. And so we'll, as we go forward, that will be more refined and we'll have a better delineation of the cost as we go forward. You don't have a lot of line items in there right now. In the future, we would anticipate that. Right? And then the next sheet is community parks, which is a little bit deceiving, to be honest, because there's more investment in there than you realize. You've got two grants. You've got the land and water grant that will be invested, at least a good chunk of that in your Jackson Park, in some of the community parks. And so, but this is money that we will start to allocate for programming, for example, and for, if we need to maintain, for example, the Peak Crest Field or something inside of our community parks, this is where we would put that money over time.
Cowan Street Park too?
Cowan Street Park, yeah, right. Michael Smith Park, we would try to allocate those expenses here so that we understand that going forward. Next one is cemetery.
I have one question.
Yep.
So, the city took over parks. Does the city fully pay for parks, or does the county give money?
Yes, and so if you go to your general fund revenue sheet, all the way back towards the beginning,
Oh, the beginning.
yeah.
Okay,
General fund revenue. If you look at, under service revenue, it doesn't have a line item, but it says services, parks, Boyle.
service revenue, I found it.
The last line in that, above subtotal.
That's not that coming in is not necessarily reflected in the individual Parks and Rec budget.
Well, I'll show you how the flow of money happens
Okay.
right now.
So I found service revenue. Where am I supposed to go?
The last line in that category, above that subtotal for that category.
1552? No.
Mm-hmm.
The
So-
budgeted, proposed?
What page you on, Earl?
Should be the general fund revenue, not that one, go to the actual.
Oh, the next page.
Yeah, the actual operating. It should say general fund revenue.
Okay,
At
I
the
was
top
on
left,
the
it
wrong
says general fund
sheet.
revenue.
Another sheet, go farther. Not that sheet, another one.
Small print.
Okay. General fund revenue.
Okay, now look under service, service revenue,
Service revenue,
next to last line, you have the subtotal line right above that.
okay.
So it says on that, service
Okay.
Parks Boyle,
So that's the county,
that's the county's contribution, so that's where the money comes in.
so they give 326?
303.
Well, 303 is this year, but that is without the pool. You reduce that because the pool didn't open last year.
But the 303 is according to our agreement.
That's actually, the contract says 322, but it is to increase based on the COLA. The COLA then is 326, would
Okay.
make that amount this year is 326.
Gotcha.
And
Are
so
you sure
if
of
you,
that?
yes,
Because I remember the 326, and they struck that down to 303 because we weren't going to open the pool.
that is why in the year end, it only shows as 303.
Right.
So the year you're going into, the pool's going to open and it will be the 326.
Right, I got you.
Okay,
Now, is
so-
this is going to increase the cost of living?
That's the increase. It goes from 322 to 326.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay? So then if you, when you get into your non-departmental, you will see an operating transfer to Parks and Recreation of 716,052.
What page you on now?
716. Yeah, I always wondered what
Same
that
page?
was.
General fund,
It
non-departmental,
looks like this. General, GF non-departmental at the bottom.
right? So that is what the city will transfer into Parks and Rec this year. Right? And 326 of that came from the county.
So you're looking at the, oh, I see it.
You see, okay, so this is where you,
It's the 7164 line, Parks and Recreation. 304, 390. 1920. I'm on the wrong page.
no, I think you were on a different page than me. Sure would nice, if somebody put page numbers on these, we could get right to it, couldn't we? I don't know who did that. Ashley, did you do that? So then, anyway, so on the revenue side, down there at the bottom on that line item, you see the county's money come in, and then the city is matching that money and spending on general fund, non-departmental on that sheet where it says operating transfer, Parks and Recreation, down towards the bottom. It has 716 going to the Parks Fund. So then if you go then over to this park summary page, that looks like what was originally on the screen, looks like this sheet with the two columns.
Okay.
Then the money, the very first line says transfer from general fund. That's where your money gets into the Parks and Rec Fund.
Okay, yeah, that's this number.
I always wondered what that,
So that's how, so it has to show up as your resources, and it has to show up as an allocation to the general fund, but you actually have a parks fund, since we do fund accounting, that money is spent from. So that then therefore, as you go forward, you can maintain a fund balance for the parks or more easily reserve money for specified purposes using that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Can I request a 5-minute break?
You sure can.
that'd be great.
Certainly.
Do I need a motion for that, or are we just gonna,
All in favor, say aye.
aye?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. 5 minutes.
26.
But, so what we tried to show right then is where the money comes in for that. It goes to operating transfer to the Parks Fund, and this is where it shows up, entering the Parks Fund, and then you spend out of that.
Okay, yeah, so we actually spend, I guess if you minus the 326, 389,
Yeah.
that looks a lot better. That's good. Because I wondered, like, like what the city donated before it took it over, and this is not as much of a difference as I anticipated, so that's good. And also, over the years, the Parks Department has increased their revenue,
A little bit.
and I think a little bit, so that's always
That's good,
key.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so the next sheet is the cemetery, once you get through the parks. Next big budget sheet is your cemetery. And then with that, rather than having the fund, it's all really shows up as one big sheet. It covers 2 pages for the cemetery, and you got the revenues at the top. That's, a lot of that is operating transfer, then you do have some lot sales in there, and you do have job work that we bill for burial services. Total allocation or appropriation is about $317,000 against expenses that balance that, because you're covering the expenses with operating transfer. Biggest expense you have is in salaries of $151,000, and then also your contract service of $87,000 to mow it.
Earl, we had a cemetery master plan done. Where are we on that? Are we allocating anything on that fund-wise, or are we allocating anything on that personnel-wise?
They are planning the committal shelter. That is shown as 0 right now, which is, if you go to page 2 of that, down at the bottom, equipment and upgrades expenditures, which is your cemetery capital, it would show up there. Again, I've not put any of the capital in yet. I wanted to show you what the impact of operations, your impact on operations for the compensation study as a singular thing before we program capital. And we want your all's feedback on the capital before we just start plugging numbers in. We don't want to try to control that.
So we're gonna get that cemetery master plan out and share it with everybody.
We can, yeah. I don't know that,
Or-
most everybody should have it, but to be honest with you, Jenny, so we'll get Commissioner Holland that document too.
Well, you might want to send it to everybody while you're at it, because.
Yeah, resend it. Ashley, can you do that? Can you follow up with that?
And let's be sure we get that filtered through the cemetery committee as far as their recommendations.
Yeah, I think Josh is working with them.
Okay.
Yep. So the next one is the stormwater, which is, before we get too far into the weeds on that, in terms of what we're really looking at as far as revenue, is we need to audit that. We need to make sure that changes since the rate was established, just physical changes where some people have constructed, for example, the Bull County Schools has constructed a lot of surface area that was grass the first time. So we need to go through that process this year. That's going to be a big focus. That, and Josh is going to try to get on, if you look on page 2, stormwater capital, get back into the cycle of watershed improvements and sub-basin evaluation. And we can have an entire presentation on the stormwater program, but right now his focus is constructing the improvements that are in the north watershed, which is really your streamline area, and then also designing your next phase, which I'm not going to try to remember which one that was, but I can have him present that down the road at a regular commission meeting if you want. The next sheet is your garbage fund. That is a new contract. Cost is going up just a little bit, but you're restructuring your rates. And so ultimately, that's going to, the restructuring of the rate, meaning it's going to be easier to attribute a standard service versus enhanced service, which is multiple carts and multiple options. So when under the new contract, that's going to increase then your ability to recover cost, right? And the actual unit prices that we got from the vendor were very competitive because it's going to be easier for them to predict what that revenue is going to be, right? So as Josh rolls through that, he's not presented that to you at the commission meeting yet. He will, but the new contract that they're evaluating now is what we have included in this budget. And the operating transfer from the general fund is predicted to go down from 85,000 down to 35,000.
Do we get several bids on that?
He will summarize that for you. I think 2 major bids that were complete. Another vendor just submitted and said they're not bidding.
It still includes the recycling?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the next sheet is your utility fund. And absorbing all of the impact of COVID here is your estimated year end. What came out stronger, mostly because your revenue was higher, and we're being very conservative on what we're spending money on still. And so we're coming out in a net positive position at the bottom of that estimated 21 column. The proposed column, your revenue is above your expenses. And right now, you can absorb the impact of the HANA study. As we go forward, we'll dial in those numbers and that fund a little bit more. But the key thing is here, you'll see the utility admin department's totally new. That is as described, as we described previously. It's got 847 in it in terms of money appropriated for the expenses of it. And then your non-departmental, your transfer to the general fund goes down a little bit, partly because that finance staff is being paid for directly from the utility, right? This budget does not include new hires, new people for departments other than a new electrician for the system. It does include the transfer of James McClure from the city's IT to the utility IT also. Now, that goes through every department, but on the next sheet is where we'll spend our most time, which is, I've highlighted some blue numbers for that, which makes it a little bit more interesting to look at, to be honest.
Just going back to the electrician hire, do you anticipate any problems with that? There's a shortage of people in that field.
What we're hoping is that the implementation of the compensation plan, the things that we're doing from HR perspective, make us a preferred destination for a good electrician.
Okay.
You know, that's our goal. In the same way that we're getting certified officers apply, the same way we're getting certified firefighters apply, then we hope that we can recruit from a broader talent pool.
Okay.
Yep. And so when you look at this, you have your proposed budget in the first column, just like we did in the general fund. You have the expenses for each department, and then we have it broken out based on the cost category. And like you would predict, the personnel costs are intense, or the expenses are most intense, in our opinion, where the blue highlights are. For example, in water distribution, 78% of those expenses are personnel costs versus the water treatment plant, where you only have 38% of those costs are personnel cost, right? So the majority of expenses at the water plant is contract services and materials and supplies, which is chemicals, for example. Contract services is electrical. And so you see how those budgets, same thing for the wastewater treatment plant, 49% of its operations are personnel, 40% is contract services, which is electric. When I'm saying electric, obviously we have more things in there than that, but that's the driver, that's the controlling cost that is driving the contract services expense for that department is electrical service. And then materials and supplies, which is chemicals, which is 12%. Whereas sewer collection and rehab, you have roughly 64% of those expenses are personnel costs. So you'll see your field staff where they're not working equipment, you'll see a greater investment in personnel, whereas in your plant costs, like in Perryville, the wastewater plant and the water plant, your personnel costs are lower, right? You get a greater investment in contract services and materials. So then we did the same thing with the pie chart, included that, but you'll see that the utility fund is not as, I don't know if he's got this up, which one is up? That's the general fund. I'll put this up there if it will. I'm gonna click on it. There it goes. How about that? So there's your utility fund. So the blue is the percentage or the representation of the expenses for personnel, which looks a lot different than the general fund, where you have so many departments that are just solely staff-driven. One of the things that I want to point out, though, is that in a lot of industries, and I'll say it again here, and I've said this before, in a lot of industries, you have different expenses and different cost categories. But what the city does, and I've said this, it's really important when we talk about investing in your compensation plan, investing in your people, we're in a knowledge-based industry, whether it's an experienced police officer, an experienced firefighter, or an experienced utility staff member, those expenses ultimately control those other expenses by their experience, how they react, what they choose to do, manages your other costs. So the investment in people is an intelligent thing to do, and retaining that knowledge is important for what we do as an industry. Right, I just want to reiterate that. Without going into each department, inside of the utility, we'll focus on the revenue side and just point out a couple of the highlights tied to revenue, which is this sheet. We'll focus on lines 4810 and 4811 and explain what those are. Those are your basic water and sewer revenue lines that drive and control the utility. Your first line is water. So when we look at water revenue, it was at 4.6, 4.5 pre-COVID. And then the first number, 3.9, is highlighted. I do think that is not, I have not been able to confirm it yet because we haven't physically had time. But that number is it's underbilled based on several factors. One, the demand, number of customers, number of delinquents, and number of, when I say demand, the volume of water that left the water plant, and also based on the number of leaks that's identified. That number should have been higher. And if you'll compare that to the line 4811 over the FY18, you'll see how in FY19 they're about equal. They should be about equal, right? So we'll continue to dive into that as evidence in estimated 21, the next column. I've got that boxed out. You'll see the water revenue is consistent with the sewer revenue, but what's important to understand is during COVID, what we talked about is that the water utility demand for water has not fallen off. So whether or not you're working or you're at home, you're still using water, right? And so if you look at estimated year end of 21 and compare that to FY19, those numbers are very similar, right? So you don't see the impact of COVID. You did see a little bit of a drop, but it's just not the same as you do to your occupational license because people are still here. They're still drinking water. It moves from industrial, for example, if there's a factory that's slowed down, to consumption at a home. Denise, what's your question?
And that number, so you don't know why that number is down, but part of it could be from non-payment, but not that much.
No, not that much. We don't have that much delinquents.
Yeah.
But we'll figure that out and continue to be involved in that number. The far right column, what was the budget in FY '20. I left that on the screen so you could see what we had predicted in FY '20 and where we're going to end up this year. Those numbers are very similar, right? So that means that we are fairly stable as a utility in response to COVID, right?
Well, those numbers should always be fairly close.
Right.
Because what comes out
Yeah.
must go down.
Yes. So now, when you look at the sewer revenue and estimated year end is 4.5. We recall we borrowed money for the Lebanon Road trunk line that went on pause, and that's money's going to be used for the wastewater plant. That was borrowed as we were starting the cost of service study. The cost of service study is about done. We would anticipate that presentation being probably in the month of May, the second meeting in May, quite possibly. And when that's complete, the number that is proposed in this budget is the impact of the rate of that debt service, basically, if that makes sense. So the rate study will demonstrate to you that you need a rate increase to cover that debt service, right? And so we will explain that in detail, but I want to let you, pointing that out so that you understand that we are programming that into the budget, subject to your all's approval of the rate study and approval of that rate change. It should be somewhere between 10 and 15%, in my opinion, based on the data that I've seen. Probably on the 15% side, if I was guessing. So the net resources available for the utility is $10,700,000 roughly against the allocation on the summary sheet of about 10 million. Just go back and I'll read the numbers right off the summary. It's 10,775,000 in terms of revenue generated by the utility against expenses of the utility of 10,521,000. So you're ahead. We'd like to be more ahead because there's unfunded capital that will need to be addressed. And so we're going to sit on this number until we get additional revenue data coming in, and then continue to address expenses to kind of see where that lands and where that points us. And if we need to refine some of the budget for the utility, we'll do that. But right now, it's a balanced budget. So then, if you want to go to the very last page, is the parking fund. And same thing, operating transfer from the general fund to fund parking of $147,000.
You said the last page, you're talking about the last
The
page.
very last page, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Then that's your parking fund. Revenue, or the expenses out of the parking fund, including debt service, is about 274, plus, your debt service is 274. Your expenses should be about 420,065, which is, that controls your operating transfer from the general fund because you're balancing that out with general fund revenue. That is your parking enforcement, parking garage operations. The leases you have, almost all of it leased except for the second floor, which is your daily turnover. Whether or not cars are there, I don't know, but those spaces are leased.
So the bottom's leased.
Bottom's leased, the top's leased.
Oh, the top's leased too.
Yeah, right. Your leases generate $236,000 in revenue. Which,
$36,000.
mm-hmm.
And then the rest of that is the parking lots?
Parking
that are
lot
rented
operation.
also?
Right. Yeah. Which we need to look at this, and we got to try to see where this goes long-term. The downtown master plan really called for a wholesale change on how we approach parking, including the construction of at least a parking garage to help consolidate. And so talking about the downtown master plan for a half second, I thought of this, and before we do another presentation on it, I thought of describing it this way. After visiting a couple of other cities over the last little bit, trying to look at what the expansion, Owensboro being one of them, we spent some time downtown in Owensboro. Those models of redevelopment is really not what we're doing, right? You're not redeveloping per se. We're trying to expand our downtown across 4th Street to give downtown a place to grow. A lot of those other communities are taking blighted areas and leveling them and then trying to redevelop those. We are trying to give our downtown room to grow. Those are two different things, right? So when we're talking about the downtown master plan, conceptualize that a little bit in your mind, because we're trying to help downtown grow west of 4th Street, east of 5th Street. We're trying to spread downtown out a little bit and increase the footprint of downtown. Hope that makes sense. But look at it like that as we go forward. So this is numbers. Take them home, look at them. I'll be happy to sit down with you if you want to look through things individually. I don't really have a lot more to talk about today. Top line summary is the general fund, we are able to, we are recovering from the impact of COVID. We are implementing the year 1 of the compensation study. That does result in a balanced budget. We will come back with a proposal on capital, and we then, on the utility fund side, you are stable after you consider the impact of COVID. You can absorb in the year we're in without new hires, other than an electrician. You're not adding staff. You can then therefore get to that balanced budget. And we do propose implementing the cost of service study, which is why you do them, right? You want to verify what your rates are. If they go up, they go up. If they go down, they go down. But right now, we're anticipating a rate study to indicate that we need to adjust the sewer rate to cover the sewer debt tied to the now wastewater plant construction.
So this is a snapshot.
Yep.
Proposed snapshot of revenue versus expenditures for the next fiscal year.
Yep.
Commissioner Holland raised a good point some time back, and I'd like to request that same point. I think it'd be prudent to look out 3 years and maybe even 5 years and take a swag, if you know what that is.
Yep.
So that we can begin to see, okay, what we do this year, how does that affect? What anticipated costs are out there that we need to be looking and anticipating this year, next year, the year after that?
Yes, and so when we get to the final budget, to the actual proposed budget, including everything, we'll do that. That'll be when we really show that, unless you want to see it sooner and differently.
Like a 3 or 5 year projection?
Yes, we'll do the
with
projection when we assemble the final budget. And so the budget document ultimately will ask you to approve, will include things like, hopefully the rate study, will hopefully include the total authorized positions, some things like that will look improved, because it'll have more detail in them. And then we will also include that projection that you're asking for. That,
Because a couple of big picture items come into play. You just mentioned a parking garage. Is that in the next 5 years, in the next 7 years, next 3 years? That's capital expenditure. It's going to be pretty substantial. We've also got this unfunded liability that is not going to go away. It's going to take an increase, and it's going to continue to increase from there. And they may have their own rate study again, in which they push it down to the cities again. You can't anticipate that, but I think those are some of the bigger items. And then if you want to throw in, how do we fund, or do we fund, any kind of new aquatic facility? Because we know, we've said for years, we can't keep doing what we're doing with the pool we've got. And I'm just rattling on some things off the top of my head. You all may have some other things that come to your mind at this point.
Well, it's an implementation of the Parks Master Plan. How do we do that? How do we pay for that? How do we pay for the downtown master plan implementation?
Right.
Yeah. One of the good things, we will give credit to KLC because their effort over the last 5 years has been immense in peeling out the CERS away from
Right, correct.
the KERS. That is extremely significant for small communities, and I'm including everybody in that, Lexington, everybody, because those entities that participate in CRS, you know, that these local communities has more fully funded their pension, and the KERS has not been. And so it is not necessarily fair to try to meld those. We appreciate KLC's effort in getting that peeled out, and they've been successful in that.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
They were successful.
they were
Yes.
successful, yeah.
Very, very good.
The other part, as we look into that, is to provide some number that says, if we're going to do these things, we've got to increase revenue this much. And if we know that 60% of our revenue comes from payroll, i.e. jobs, that gives all the folks involved in economic development, which is a lot of folks, that gives them all an understanding that we've got to figure out what it takes to get this number in terms of payroll so that we can do what we need to do on the service side.
Yeah.
That number doesn't exist today.
And Earl, I guess for the simple person that I am, in your proposal for 21-22, you have said to us that the anticipated revenue is 19.2 million, and the anticipated expenditures, appropriations, is 18.7. Thus, a simple man can say, looking at this on the surface, including all the proposed increases in compensation, that we can afford this budget.
You can afford this budget without diving into your reserves.
Right.
And the caveat is you don't have a lot of room for capital left,
Right.
right?
Okay.
So that means that the money that you are currently spending, you have to make sure you are spending that in the direction you intend, long-term.
And I think it's good that we all kind of understand that there will be changes in the future to, you know, have the pay increases, whether it be tweaking benefits or tweaking, you know, a lot of times if I have a better trained employee, I can have less people, you know, and anyway,
yeah, that's
there's a lot
totally
of
true.
there's a lot of opportunities that they save money, and hopefully we can keep seeing ways that different departments are saving money to benefit in the long run, so.
Well, that electrician is a good example. I mean,
Yeah.
some things make sense to outsource, and I, you know, the mowing is an easy thing to point to. You know, it's hard to pay an employee retirement benefits to sit on a lawnmower all day. But then at the same time, the electrician, for example, we spend so much money on electrical servicing. It's, you know, that hopefully through PM, if nothing, preventive maintenance, if nothing else, you're going to save money with that to offset those expenses, you know?
And in fact, we've had a little bit of brain drain because our employees have worked here and gotten certified, say, to be an electrician, retired from the city, and now we're subcontracting back with them for electrical services. We can hopefully, you know,
Some of
keep
those
those
costs
people
down.
or, you know, figure out how to work that out so it's more economical for everyone.
Let me take that and turn it 180, and I don't know. By the time you take somebody and put them on staff and pay the medical and the retirement component to their total package versus contract labor, you may be paying more per hour, but you don't have that retirement, you don't have that medical cost.
There's a balance. There's a balance, so it's all about, again, in a knowledge-based industry, and what your hope is that by having staff there, you're preempting that next call. You're preventing that next call. You're trying to steer it towards preventive calls, not just in response to problems. The response to problems, when you actually incur, instead of repairing something before it's broken, you're catching it after it's broken. So now not only do you have to get a service technician there, you've also got material that you hopefully could have prevented, right? So when you're dealing with a knowledge-based component, it's a little bit different metric, but you're totally correct. You've got to, every position, you've got to balance that. Yeah.
I got a silly question. Oh, were you done?
Sure. We need a silly question.
Well, no, just because I'm new, this is the page for non-departmental with proposed, and we sat through all the, folks giving presentations. Do we ever meet together and talk about it? Oh, we don't?
No, do we? I thought you said, have we?
Like they had a little column, and we said, oh,
Yeah,
we think we.
yeah.
So the next so there'll be,
How does this part work?
there'll be a meeting that we have where we will ask you to fill in the blanks on that sheet. So that sheet that you had with the color on it right then, the far right column, I think is proposed unless I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And it should be blank. So that's how much money,
Well, I was filling it in
I
as they
think we
went.
filled it in as we
a
went.
lot of you did. And so we can summarize that, maybe even if y'all want to do that Monday, if you're ready to do that, when you want to do that, we will.
I think typically what we've done is, and I missed that meeting, but I have watched it, but I don't have any numbers put down. But typically what we did was we would fill it in, give it to the city manager, and then you would maybe average it or,
And I would report that back to you.
yes, and come
Right.
back and
Right.
bring that back to us.
Right.
And then we would debate.
Right. So if you,
Debate what to give
Then
each
go from there.
department. That would be
if
good.
you all have those
Make sure we
numbers
talk
and,
about it.
yeah, and send those to the city clerk, then we'll start to assemble that for that presentation. We balance the budget first, and then what's left over is for community agencies. Right now, we're asking you to increase allocation to 110 from 77, partly because that increase is going towards Senior Citizen Center. Not gonna lie, right? Like
But
that's
even with
that's
that
known.
increase, that's less than.
What it was 2
years ago.
Yeah.
But and I say this every year, but in my mind, Parks and Rec, it used to be Parks and Rec. Planning and zoning, senior citizens, economic development,
Airport.
and airport. Those, in my mind, are completely separate from all these other agencies because we really are obligated to fund those.
Right.
We have agreements to fund those.
And they're not included in the 108,000,
Um,
right?
No, the
Parks and Rec, isn't
Parks and Rec is not, Senior Citizen Center is.
Economic development's not in it.
Economic development is not.
Yeah.
But I will show that when we talk about, I'll
Well, can we
communicate
break-
that,
Can we break those out?
I'll communicate that effectively when
Separately,
when
yeah.
when you all get that in, we'll totalize it.
Yeah.
And then we'll present it back to
Well, I
you and we'll
want to know
explain
what the
then.
total is for those four.
Yes.
Because those are separate
Right.
from this other number.
Yes, we were, those are, you should find those in here, but without spending that time, we will summarize that for you at that meeting. We were anticipating doing that.
Okay,
Yep.
that'd be good.
And would you send us another chart?
A blank one?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you do that,
That
Ashley?
shows all the different, what they got last time.
Yeah.
What they asked for this time, I think it was on there, but mine was in such bad shape, I think I threw it away.
Was that in the budget packet?
For that meeting.
For that meeting? Okay,
Yeah.
I can go back and find that,
Yeah.
but it is on there what they
You had
received last
multiple
year,
years, yeah.
what they're requesting, and then we fill in our amount.
You fill in your amount, get it back to Ashley, then we'll totalize it for you, and then we will have a portion of some meeting we'll dedicate to you confirming how much you want in
Okay.
this final number.
And Jenny, just for an FYI, for all 5 of us, there are some agencies that, some of us left zeros. We didn't suggest or recommend any amount, so feel free to do that.
And so I'm suggesting a number of 108, 800. If that number comes down, that's up to you all,
Yeah.
right? Like, you all control that number. Totally. Like, that's not something that is influenced by the cost of electric.
And if it goes up,
Right.
we create some more work for you, right?
Yeah, true. So hopefully that's sufficient for today, and we'll continue on, and if unless y'all want to stay and have coffee, we'll be done. That's all I have for you today.
I want to thank you for an excellent presentation. I know you put in a lot of work. This is your first year to do this. You certainly, I think, done your homework. I'm impressed, not that you have to impress me, but I am impressed with your level of in-depth pulling together of where we are and where we need to where we need to get in order to provide the services that, at the level we want to provide. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, and I apologize to the public for the screen. We'll get there. We'll figure that out too. That
You
is-
should.
That's,
Anything else?
Just number the pages.
Do it.
that's on me too. I have a PDF generator after I print all the individual sheets, and I didn't,
They're all number one.
they're all number one in our
But it has
hearts.
the name at the bottom.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we can do that.
Okay, you want a motion to adjourn?
Yes, are these documents available to the public?
They're draft, technically not yet.
Okay.
But when we get to that next, not Monday, but the next meeting after that, yeah, they'll be published.
Once we have the
Because I'm
first
sure the
reading.
public, who, if anybody is watching,
Right.
you know, they'd like to see numbers that they couldn't see before.
Yep.
Huh? No, they're not either. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion's made. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. We are adjourned.
Thank you all.